Good evening, and welcome to this week's episode of Wanderlust Wednesdays. Today, I'm going to be talking about the Romantic Danube, one of our most popular itineraries. It's a relatively short itinerary that you can extend a little bit on both ends on the Danube River through Germany and Austria, Hungary. And as always, when we do this, we will start with a short video introducing the itinerary.
This beguiling 8-day itinerary showcases some of the Danube River's favorite cities, plus legendary landscapes along the way. Your journey begins with an overnight in Budapest, Hungary. Known as the Paris of the East, the impressive architecture and culture are sure to draw you in. Next up, Vienna, Austria's capital, and its fascinating cultural treasures, where you'll enjoy another overnight stay. Then it's on to Goethwijk Abbey, a Viking exclusive, where monks work and worship just as they have for more than 900 years. You'll sail on to enchanting Passau, Germany, a quaint town that in ancient times was once a Roman colony. Your Viking journey concludes with an overnight in charming Regensburg, giving you plenty of time to explore the heart of its medieval city centre, a UNESCO World Heritage Site.
Let's talk about the Viking way and what it means to travel with Viking on any of the rivers of Europe, or for that matter, the rest of the world. At Viking, we believe that people travel to get to know other cultures, other people, and people have lives and people have jobs. And this has led us to incorporate elements of local life and elements of working life into our program offering. We call one category of these experiences local life experiences. Another category is working world experiences. And then finally, we also make a point to bring relationships that we have forged over the years into our product offering. On the Romantic Danube, for instance, we have worked very hard with an abbey to create a program that is very, very unique on the Danube. We also have direct access to the Vienna Boys Choir. Through Carina, we have really good relationships with Highclere Castle, and those experiences we have listed under the header privileged access, because these are experiences that you would not be able to have on your own. You would not be able to have them without Viking. On the Romantic Danube, there are quite a few ways of experiencing the Viking way of shore excursions. Local life, for instance, is something that you will encounter during the Heurigen dinner outside of Vienna, where you meet locals and sit down in a vineyard to drink that year's wine. It's a tradition in Vienna that only the wine of that particular year can be drunk at the vineyard under certain very specific conditions. And it's a great way to experience a bit of outdoor life as the Viennese like to do it. At the same time, at the Naschmarkt, also in Vienna, you can get a glimpse of what the Viennese take home to cook a dinner or to simply snack a little bit. Naschen is the Austrian word for snacking. So Naschmarkt really means snack market. And it's a lot more than that. It really gives you a very broad view of everything that you can experience in the Viennese kitchen. You will get a glimpse of the working world if you go backstage at the Spanish riding school to see how the workers in the stables groom the horses, how the horses are taken out to practice for the world famous shows that they put on for spectators at certain times of the day. In Regensburg, or rather just outside in the countryside, you can experience what it's like to run a microbrewery, to work with different strands of hops and grains in order to create the beers that the region around Regensburg is very famous for. And then we have some combinations of things where you could say we combine perhaps privileged access with what working world is like. A perfect example of how we can combine certain aspects of the Viking way into one excursion is what we have done with the Abbey of Goethwijk, a Benedictine abbey that sits on top of a hill overlooking the Wachau Valley. Here We follow the monks in their daily lives, but we also give you a peek into aspects of abbey life that are normally not accessible to the public. We've created this program especially for Viking. And finally, behind the scenes at the Vienna Boys Choir is an excursion where, with very small groups, we provide you with a small private concert of one of the most famous boys choirs in the world in Vienna, through a relationship that we have forged over the years. So each one of our cruises has these elements in them. And today, as I talk about the Romantic Danube, I will give you a flavor of the local life, the working world, and the privileged access aspects of the cruise as I walk you through this presentation. So here we are with our Romantic Danube itinerary, our cruise from Budapest to Regensburg. This is a cruise that you can book in both directions, but for today we'll focus on the direction where we start in Hungary's capital. And I would say that it would be a great idea if you want to really experience Budapest to its fullest, to take the opportunity to book a few nights before you cruise with us on an extension. You can do that either in a hotel of what I would say is the standard that many people have grown accustomed to with Viking, or you can book a premium hotel. Either way, Budapest is really worth a few extra days if you have the time. There are things like the Grand Market, where you can buy anything that anywhere in Hungary would end up on dinner plates. It's a fantastic, enormous, cavernous experience of food from all over the country. There are the Parliament buildings to see and visit. There are streets to walk. There are beautiful cafes. You must have hot chocolate in Budapest, because hot chocolate in many parts of the world is a little milk or a little water with a little bit of cocoa. And in Budapest, they figured out that hot chocolate really needs to be molten chocolate. It is among the best in the world that you can get anywhere, I would imagine. And you must have cake. In Budapest, you must have cake. And again, in order to do all these things, to visit the Széchenyi baths, the spectacular palaces of bathing, to see some of the museums in Budapest, I would highly recommend that you spend a few extra days. The cruise begins in Budapest, where you arrive to board the ship that is docked right under the chain bridge most of the time, in the middle of the city that is dissected by the river. And after some time in Budapest, you will travel along the Danube bend. That is that first curve in the river that you can see on the map, where the sheer cliffs on both sides of the river create a very dramatic scenery. And as you travel then on through the night, the next morning you will wake up in Vienna. You'll have 2 glorious days in Vienna. And then as cruising resumes, you travel again through one of the loveliest parts on the Danube, through the Wachau Valley, which is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and with good reason. It is your proverbial landscape of little villages, church towers along the river, vineyards on both sides, old castle ruins. It's really a very, very iconic stretch of river. And after going through the Wachau, you travel again a little bit in the evening and in the early morning to arrive in Passau. Passau sits at a confluence of 3 rivers. 2 rivers empty into the Danube, and that basically means that wherever you are in Passau, you will see one of these 3 rivers, the Danube, the Ilz, and the Inn. And then beyond Passau, the Danube becomes a little narrower. It's not quite as wide as it is in parts of Austria, although it's still a formidable river. And eventually you will dock in the city of Regensburg, where your cruise comes to an end after spending some time there, not just discovering Regensburg, but also the surrounding countryside. You can travel all the way from Regensburg to Nuremberg or to Munich on the days that you have in that city. So our voyage begins in Budapest. The slide that you see here shows the view from the hills of Buda to the other side. The flatter part of Budapest is simply known as Pest. And the man in the foreground is King Matthias, who played a very important role in the unification of what today we know as Hungary. From the Fisherman's Bastion, that's the structure with the 3 turrets, you have some of the most spectacular views all over the city. It's a very classic view. Of course, if you have arrived a little early on the day of embarkation, you may want to do a little bit of exploring on your own. The market hall is always an enormous favorite. It's not open every day, but most of the weekdays you will be able to go there and maybe get a little bit of salami or a piece of Hungarian cheese or local honey. It's really one of the great places to get a sense of the flavors and the smells that make up Hungary and that make up Hungarian food. Speaking of food, I would now like to share a video clip that shows Karina cooking goulash, which is the national dish in Hungary. It's by now it's spread all over Central Europe because it's easy to make and it's delicious. If you want your own recipes for goulash, either the Hungarian version or the Viennese version, you can go on the Viking website and you will find the recipes there.
Budapest's Great Market Hall dates to 1896. It's a draw for both tourists and the locals in search of the very best in fresh food and delicacies. Located just blocks from our Viking ships, I'm exploring it with my friend Agnes. Today we're preparing one of Hungary's national dishes, the hearty gulyás, a meaty soup that originated with the region's herdsmen, or gulyás. It's a favorite that quickly spread throughout Europe.
We're back and we're ready to cook our goulash, and it's a typical Hungarian dish.
First, we need onions. The onion gives the stew taste and consistency. So now we're gonna saute the onions in vegetable oil.
How much salt do you want?
To taste. And just stir a little bit and cover. We're gonna cut the beef and cube it.
Okay, so we've cut our meat.
And now we're gonna add paprika. So before adding paprika, always remove the pot from the heat.
But this is not spicy. This is a sweet one.
This is the sweet one, yes. We're gonna add peppercorns and bay leaves and the meat. We're gonna add water now.
Okay.
Just to cover. 2 more things to add. 1 sweet pepper and 1 tomato.
Okay.
And cover and simmer. Always low heat. Now we have time to clean the vegetables. Okay, now we're gonna make csipetka noodles. So we need 1 egg, but we use only 1/3 of this egg.
All right.
And add some salt, please.
So you're taking out 2/3 and leaving 1/3.
Now I will add the flour and you will use your fingers to knead the dough. After a while, you will be able to push and roll, just knead it.
Just knead it. Yeah, no, it's starting to come together. But it does start off as a very messy thing.
Always add some flour on the plate because they are sticky. So just 1 small pinch, roll, and that's it.
They look like Tic Tacs.
Yes, Tic Tac. Yeah.
About the same size and about the same dimensions.
It cooks very fast. We will add this just 5 minutes before finishing the soup. Now it's time to add the veggies. Smells good.
It smells really good.
Let's see if the meat
And it
is
looks
tender. Perfect. So it's time to add parsnips, carrots, garlic, and caraway seed. We add a teaspoon of ground caraway seed. The soup, please. More water, not too much. When parsnips and carrots are half tender, potatoes go in.
Still smells good, better and better.
Delicious. So let's taste 1 potato. Very soft. So please add the csipetka noodles. Just 5 minutes and they are done. Okay, that was the last step.
And now we get to the best part.
Yeah, sure, we go and eat.
Let's go.
On day 2 of the cruise, you start your morning with a tour of the pest side of the city. the flatter part, which has a lot of the grand structures of Budapest, the National Opera House, the Parliament buildings, a lot of houses that were built in Budapest's heyday in the late 19th and early 20th century. There's a lot of Art Nouveau architecture in Budapest. It's actually one of the cities in Europe that's famous for it. You will drive over Hero Square, which is, if you will, a lesson in Hungarian history, in sculptures and in monuments and in statues. Then you cross the Danube into Budapest Castle District. And finally, after visiting the Fisherman's Bastion and the Matthias Church, you will be on your way through the Hungarian countryside to catch up with your ship just before the ship starts sailing through the Danube Bend, that very spectacular stretch of river just before the ship crosses the border into Slovakia on its way to Vienna. On day 3, you wake up in Vienna. And Vienna is the erstwhile capital of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And when the emperor was Charles V, the saying was that he was an emperor over a realm where the sun didn't set, because it was the largest empire at the time in the world. And Vienna is really a city that, as far as the size is concerned, seems a little disproportionate to how small Austria really is these days. And that has everything to do with the fact that it's really the city that symbolizes the heyday of that empire. This is why you have these grand palaces from the Baroque period. You have the flourishing in that same time, the flourishing of classical music. And it makes Vienna just such an incredible city to spend the next 2 days in. And we cannot wait on that morning of day 3, we cannot wait to share it with you. And this is why there are so many different ways of showing you Vienna. There is the panoramic tour that gives you a broad overview. And that's really a good introduction, because after all, you'll spend the next 2 days there. And to start off with just getting an overview is probably a really good way of doing it. You can do that either on a coach, or you can join a guide that will take you into Vienna subway. A very clean system, a very swift system that takes you to places in a most convenient way without a coach ever having to find a spot to park. And it allows you to spend some time with the Viennese as they go to work or go grocery shopping. My preferred way of travel, of course, it has to be something that you do when you feel good and when you are willing and able for that day to walk a little bit more than you would normally do on a panoramic tour. From the days of the waltz and from the days of Mozart and Strauss, Vienna has maintained its love for music. One of the things that we offer you in Vienna is to go behind the scenes with the Vienna Boys Choir, one of the most famous choirs in the world. They have an institute where the young men live. This is where they get all of their classes. They go to school just like any other kid their age, and then they spend an awful lot of time being groomed in this grand tradition of music that is so endemic everywhere you go in Vienna. By the way, if that's your taste, Vienna even has incredible jazz clubs. So it is a city that really pulls out all the stops when it comes to culture, popular and high culture. The museums that you can visit in Vienna, there is a museum quarter that I would highly recommend for anyone that likes the style that we sometimes call Art Nouveau or Jugendstil. There's a museum that is dedicated just to that has probably the best collection of works by Egon Schiele, one of the grand masters of the movement. You can go to the Belvedere Palace, and as a matter of fact, we have created an experience around the Belvedere Palace where you can dance, where you can learn a little bit about the waltz, but where you also will see some of the art collections there. Among them, Gustav Klimt's famous Kiss painting, probably one of the best known works of that period in Viennese art history. For your second day in Vienna, we also have lined up a number of shore excursions that allow you to explore different facets of this incredible city. For instance, we will have a local chef that takes you over the Naschmarkt. The Naschmarkt is the the century-old market in the heart of Vienna, where people go to get their groceries and their fruits and vegetables, but also their little nice sweet bites or their savory bites. And this is where the word Naschmarkt comes from. Naschen means snacking. And it is a place where you will not just see people with big bags of cabbage and potatoes and apples and bananas, but also where they will carry paper bags with little snacks that they're munching on as they walk home or as they explore the city a little bit more. And you get to do this with them. Then there is an opportunity to go behind the scenes at the Lipizzaner stallions. As you probably have heard, one of the things that Vienna is famous for is the presentation of these stallions in the Spanish riding school for the public, where they perform. And that in and by itself is an incredible experience for which you can go online and get your tickets. These performances do not happen every day, and sometimes they're sold out very far in advance. But I would encourage you to explore, if this is what you really want to do, to explore this even a little bit ahead of time. On the ship, we'll be able to help you if we can to get you tickets, but to go behind the scenes is a completely different experience. Here you get to see the horses a little bit more up close, you get to meet the people that take care of the horses, and you will understand how it all works. The inner workings of the Spanish riding school are very, very interesting. There are a lot of traditions. There's a lot of know-how, of course, that goes into taking care of these incredible animals. And that is what the theme of this entire experience is. In the evening, we have a Mozart and Strauss concert lined up for you. It's something that has been curated very carefully to give you a broad overview of the kind of music that Vienna is so famous for all around the world. And it is a little playful. There's a tiny bit of interaction with the musicians, and that is very much in keeping with the tradition of classical music. Mozart primarily was an entertainer. He made it a point to have people laugh a little bit in his shows and to keep the whole thing a little lighthearted. And we do this too, albeit in a spectacular setting that reminds you of the era of Mozart. Frescoes on the ceilings, columns with a lot of decorations, and so on and so forth. We generally bring you to a palace, to one of the urban palaces that Vienna is so rich in, to enjoy the music of Mozart and Strauss. You could also roam a little further afield, venture into neighboring Slovakia to get an overview of Bratislava. Bratislava sits right between Budapest and Vienna on the Danube River. And you can think of Bratislava as a mini Vienna, if you will. It reminds you a little bit of that city, but it also has its own flavor. Slovakia obviously used to be part of Czechoslovakia. It's a country all of its own, and it has traditions all of its own. Bratislava is the capital of Slovakia, so some of the buildings that you will see will remind you of that. The Parliament building, the Palace of the President is a very opulent building just on the edge of the old city. And we spent quite a few hours in Bratislava. It's a bit of a travel. It's about a little over an hour to get there. You cross an international border, which is always great fun. And it really gives you a good overview of what that city has to offer. Of course, if there's any city in the world where you would like to learn how to waltz properly on the music of Mozart and Strauss, that would also be Vienna. And we have created this experience where you actually go to a very venerable institution, a dancing school, where on a beautiful parquet floor, we will have Austrian teachers that show you just how to do it. And you get to dance on the music of Strauss and Mozart. Finally, there is a way to explore the Viennese countryside on an e-bike, which allows you to break a little bit of a sweat, but not too much, and see an aspect of Austria that thus far you probably haven't explored yet, as you are in the middle of a city. It's where the Austrians themselves, the residents of Vienna, like to spend their weekends in the Viennese woods or along the Danube, and we recreate this experience on a bicycle if you are somewhat actively inclined. Whatever else you do, you will have some free time in Vienna, and it is very important to spend some time in a coffee house. The coffee house is such an integral part of Viennese culture that it would be a shame for you to miss it. And who wouldn't like a piece of cake? What you see here in the picture is a piece of Sachertorte, which combines the flavors of apricots and chocolate into a cake that has gone around the world, made famous first by the Hotel Sacher. And the cafe in Hotel Sacher is just one of many places in Vienna where you can have this experience. One of my favorites is Café Landmann. And overall, the idea of a Viennese coffee house was that you would get your coffee and maybe a piece of cake, and then you would read the newspaper. And particularly the artists, painters or writers or poets, they would spend hours reading the papers, talking to other artists and philosophers and people that didn't have a lot of money, that could sit indoors, read the papers that they couldn't afford to buy, all on one cup of coffee. So the tradition is to spend hours in a coffee house in Vienna. You wouldn't need to spend hours in there, but it's certainly something that I would really recommend for you to do. And don't be shy about ordering a second piece of cake, because that is what the Viennese like to do as well.
The year was 1832. Vienna was thriving with the Austrian Empire in full bloom under Emperor Francis I. The graceful waltz and composer Johann Strauss Sr. had captured the Viennese imagination. And a new taste was born when Prince Wenzel von Metternich demanded a special dessert for an important function. Through a twist of fate, the imposing task fell upon the shoulders of a young apprentice, Franz Sacher. Toiling feverishly, he concocted a delectable combination of chocolate, apricot jam, and whipped cream, the Sacher Torte, which, it's said, delighted Metternich's guests. In 1876, son Edward Sacher built upon his father's reputation, opening Vienna's exclusive, luxurious Hotel Sacher. After World War II, the hotel fell into Russian, then British hands during the occupation, before the family restored its beauty and traditions, including one that might surprise you: special treatment for dog guests. The policy began long ago with owner Anna Sacher, who always had her dogs close by. Of course, many human faces have also been greeted warmly into these opulent surroundings. Hotel Sacher feels like a living museum, a fascinating time capsule of country and culture, where every wall speaks volumes about the intriguing past that unfolded here. Even in the cafe, which also happens to be the perfect spot to experience history with your taste buds. The Sacher Torte, with its secret recipe that's still made almost entirely by hand. Hotel Sacher is a rare treasure and a reminder of the many wonders just waiting to be explored in Vienna.
The next morning, we really need you to get up quite early, because this is the day where river cruising reveals itself in all its glory. And that's only a little bit of an overstatement. It really is that great of an experience to be on the sun deck as the ship glides through the Wachau Valley. Austria's Wachau Valley is not a UNESCO World Heritage Site for nothing. It is one of the most spectacular river landscapes that you can see anywhere. And it has these little villages with the church towers. It has hilltop castles. It has rolling hills with vineyards. It is really mile for mile one of the best experiences on this cruise. And you would want to enjoy this from the aquavit terrace or from the sun deck. You will get yourself a little warm coffee, and maybe you put on a little sweater to have this experience as the sun rises over the valley. That's how I would do it anyhow. Rest assured that throughout the day, the landscape is just spectacular. So even if you're not an early riser, you will thoroughly enjoy this day. And one of the great things that you will experience on this day is your visit to Goodwijk Abbey. And Goodwijk Abbey's relationship with Viking is such a good example of how we like to present you the destinations that you visit. It's a perfect example of what the Viking way all entails. We spend a lot of time with the abbots and with some monks and with Karina and our product team to put together a program that really fleshes out what life is like in an abbey such as this. It's a working world. An abbey is not just a beautiful church and frescoes and museums where a lot of art is stored and put on display. It's also a place where monks have a role to play in the social network that they're so much the center of. So there are monks, for instance, that go out from the abbey every day to minister in the little parishes, in the little communities around the abbey. There are people that are involved in forestry. There are people that are involved in winemaking. And then there are the people that are involved in putting together this spectacular program where you really go behind the scenes to understand what the abbey is all about. What you see here in this slide is one of those really spectacular moments that you'll have. There is a stairwell in the building that was built for the visit of an emperor, and therefore the building is called the Kaisertrakt. And as you walk in, there is this stairwell. It's 3 stories, and on the ceiling there is one of the most spectacular Baroque ceiling paintings anywhere in the world. This one was done by Paul Troga, and it has a really interesting, I would say, a really interesting 20th century aspect to it. You will look up to the ceiling and you will wonder how it stays in place, because it's massive. There aren't very many columns that seem to hold it in place. And precisely that was one of the problems that they had to solve with modern engineering, because at some stage a number of years ago, the ceiling was in danger of collapsing on its own, under its own weight. And there's a modern structure that you will be able to see if you want to, a very modern structure that holds up this ceiling. And it's precisely this kind of behind the scenes look that we provide you with almost at every twist and turn as you tour the abbey. But also, I'm going to share a little video with you that we made in the initial stages of our cooperation, and it really shows you very well what I just spoke about.
Overlooking Austria's remarkable Wachau Valley is the gracious Göttweig Abbey. Built on land donated by Passau's Bishop Altmann, this stunning Baroque monastery complex, inspired by Spain's Escorial, is actually the 3rd version, with fires destroying most of the monastery in 1580 and again in 1718.
The monastery is 900 years old. Göttweig is a very special place with a great history. It is a spiritual place, a place for freedom, a place for peace. It is a place where the people come together and they go away with much power in the heart.
Göttweig is a Benedictine monastery, an order founded by Saint Benedict of Nursia, a 6th century monk who established the Abbey of Monte Cassino on a hilltop southeast of Rome around 529 AD. An astute and critical scholar of religious practices, Saint Benedict clarified the way European monasteries are organized, how monks should live and work, and what the focus of their religious life should be. His thoughts evolved into the book The Rule of Saint Benedict, a guide for balancing prayer, reading and work, ora, lege et labora in Latin.
Ora, pray, labora, work, and lege means to read. Saint Benedict ordered every monk of his monastery must learn to read and to write. Everybody should read the Gospel for himself. In the daily life of the monks until now, every monk there is a time reserved to read.
And I understand also during meals, you have silent meals, but there is a reader.
Yes, the reader has the possibility to eat afterwards. We read during the lunch and in the suppers in the evening,
Yes.
both.
And I noticed in your private quarters you have a special reading chair.
I like to sit there reading. It makes the view wide and large.
From the beginning, Göteborg has operated differently than most Benedictine monasteries.
We are not so contemplative in our life like other Benedictines. For example, the French monasteries are all contemplative. They do not go outside.
Göteborg always focused on outreach, which was a blessing when Holy Roman Emperor Joseph II began his massive reforms.
Monasteries which have been contemplative, Joseph II says that is not necessary. We need parish priests, we need monks and sisters in the hospitals, we need monks and sisters in the schools, all others you can forget. He dissolved 700 monasteries, but Göteborg survived.
Today, Göteborg continues to focus on the world beyond the monastery walls.
We care for many parishes, 35 at the moment. We take care for schools.
You are teaching in the high schools?
Yes, philosophy. And we have some in the hospitals. We have a house for retreats and a house for young people.
I understand you've also gotten involved with the immigration situation.
Yes, that's nothing new for us. Every crisis, if it has been Poland, if it has been Croatia, we have always refugees in our monastery. And at the moment, it's families of Syria. We try to help so good as possible.
While Göteborg is headed by Abbot Columban, I was surprised to learn he has a cabinet of sorts, and that all the monks have a voice in leadership and the direction of the monastery.
I'm elected by the brothers, and then there is the second man on my side is the prior, then the third man is the sub-prior, and then the monks. There are 5 persons, and if there is a problem in the monastery, I call these 5, come, and we have a discussion how to solve.
So every vote for every layer counts equally?
That's equally, yes.
Equal count,
Yeah.
yeah.
It's a democratic system which reached back to the 6th century of St. Benedict. It's no creation of our time, but it's very, very modern.
To fund Göteborg's many parishes and support programs, the monastery's extensive lands are put to work, with more than 13,000 acres of woodlands being selectively harvested to ensure this treasured forest endures the test of time. The slopes around Göteborg are also used to produce the grapes that create the wines for which the Wachau is famous. Grüne Veltliner, Riesling, Chardonnay and Pinot Noir, as well as wines used in Holy Mass. And then there's the Marille, another Wachau favorite. It's also grown under the watchful eye of Göteborg monks, in partnership with nearby orchards and right on the monastery grounds.
It's very nice.
Transformed into tasty juices, jams and even schnapps, ultimately the Marille is yet another way for Göteborg to continue and enhance its community outreach. Though Göteborg has survived nearly 10 centuries, serving amid the distractions of the modern world has perhaps never been more daunting, requiring absolute focus from every monk.
I think the rule of St. Benedict will help the monk to be a man who has a good disposition to heaven, but also good disposition to the earth. It is important that the monk lives his vocation, not only in the monastery, but also outside the monastery. I think everybody can be happy in his life. If I'm in a family, or if I'm alone, if I'm a monk in a monastery, it is important that I live that. What I see, that is my vocation.
At Göttweg, I experienced calmness, a sense of peace, and moments of spontaneous joy. It wasn't the world I'd imagined, but rather one rich in history and spirit, shared by some of the friendliest people I've met.
We are delighted to welcome Viking guests to Göttweg Abbey.
Göttweg opens the door to an intriguing world that I found fascinating. I hope you too will have the chance to explore its many treasures.
So we hope that you then have some time in the afternoon through the Wachau Valley to relax and enjoy the scenery from the sun deck or from the Aquavit Terrace, because then when you get to Passau the next day, there is just such an awful lot to do again that we would really want you to be energized and ready to go. Passau sits on the confluence of three rivers, the Ilz, the Inn, and the Danube. And it is really a very, very spectacular setting. It allows you to walk up some hills, overlook the city as it sits there with all these rivers coming from different sides, and they really, the city sits on a peninsula. It's just such a beautiful location, and there are so many different vantage points around the city. We will introduce the city itself to you, the Old Town, through a walking tour. And that is really to give you an orientation and to get a sense of the history of the city. And then there are a whole host of other things that you can do. There are a few full day programs. There are some afternoon programs. And I will just pick a few of them that I really think you would enjoy. We have, for instance, recreated a Bavarian beer fest for an afternoon experience. Keep in mind that a true Bavarian beer fest, as you may know, will run several days, and it starts very early in the morning. And that is, we believe, maybe not exactly to your liking. So we have taken an afternoon where we bring you to a location just outside of Passau, and with the people that own the location, we have created a program that gives you little bits and pieces of that Bavarian beer culture, the food that goes with it, the music that goes with it. It's really a really nice flavor of Bavaria, to get a sense of Bavaria with your ears, with your mouth, and with your eyes. Then there is a quite a spectacular way of experiencing what Passau and the surrounding countryside have to offer, and that is a fixed wing flight to Neuschwanstein. And the castle's name may not ring a bell. It sounds very German, of course, but it is the inspiration for Walt Disney's Cinderella Castle. And it's such an iconic part of Bavaria. It was built by a man who was called Mad King Ludwig. And he was called mad because he was a little strange, maybe. He had very exotic tastes, and he built a number of these palaces that seemed to come out of medieval fairy tales, and that's what Neuschwanstein is as well. A very eccentric man, but certainly someone who left his mark on Bavaria in the shape of these castles and these palaces. It's a full day program that really gives you a big slice of Bavaria and the Bavarian Alps. There is also an opportunity to spend the day in Salzburg. And Salzburg, of course, is best known as the backdrop for the Julie Andrews film, The Sound of Music. It is also, and that's probably more important to the Austrians, it's also really one of the very important cities in the musical tradition, musical history, but also the musical presence of Austria. The Salzburger Festspiele still today are among the great highlights of the musical year in Austria. And of course, Mozart lived there and worked there, has left his traces in Salzburg. So it's really a city that offers you layer upon layer of history and culture And perhaps especially for an American audience, of course, culminating in that part of history that is depicted in The Sound of Music. Regensburg is one of the oldest cities in Germany, and its history is full of anecdotes and legends that your guides will share with you to make for a really lively walking tour. There are just a lot of fun stories about Regensburg. There's also an opportunity here to join a tour that focuses on the Jewish history of Regensburg. At one time, Regensburg had a very large Jewish community, and the vestiges of that are really well preserved now and are accessible to people that are so interested. I haven't mentioned this yet, but in Hungary, if you have a little bit of extra time in Budapest, there is also a way to tour the old Jewish quarter of that city and visit the Grand Synagogue in Budapest. Very interesting, very important part of Central Europe's history. In the afternoon in Regensburg, there are a number of things that you can do. I've mentioned visiting the microbreweries in the area surrounding Regensburg, and you will have noticed that from the Wachau Valley, that is known for its wine, in this part of Bavaria there where you have arrived, beer is what people drink. And the microbreweries are just a perfect example of this. You can also visit Weltenburg Abbey, and that abbey is part of that Central European tradition of Baroque abbeys with beautiful decorations, with pastel-colored murals and ceiling frescoes. Weltenburg Abbey is certainly one of the best preserved and one of the most beautiful churches that you could visit anywhere in the Danube area. Another option from Regensburg is to visit the nearby city of Nuremberg. And there are few cities in Germany that can match Nuremberg's significance in history. Not only is it a city that was already very large and important in the Renaissance and earlier than that in the times where the emperor would travel from city to city. Nuremberg was one of the imperial cities. That meant that the emperor would spend some time there in his court that would travel from place to place. And the imperial castle still overlooks the city today. It became a focal point because of this imperial history during the Third Reich, with the Nazi rallying grounds, and the remnants of those are still in Nuremberg and they will be visited on this tour. After the war, the Allies decided that Nuremberg was, because of this significance in the Third Reich, it would also be a really good city to hold judgment over what had happened during the Third Reich. And that made Nuremberg the city of the trials. And all of these locations can be visited on this tour. You will get a complete overview of that really significant role that Nuremberg played in Germany's history. Aside from that, although it was very badly damaged during World War II, it has been rebuilt, and there's an awful lot of beautiful buildings and churches and houses to visit and see. There are beautiful fountains, one actually so beautiful that it's simply called the Beautiful Fountain, and it's a great place to do a little bit of shopping. On day 8 in Regensburg, that is where the cruise ends. But if you want to, and we would surely like to, stay a little longer with us, you have a number of options. One of them is to spend 3 nights with us in Prague, the capital of the Czech Republic, and just one of the most beautiful, wonderful cities in Central Europe. There is another way to spend more time in Nuremberg on a 2-night extension, and then you can combine the two for a 4-night extension in Nuremberg and in Prague. And both cities really deserve a closer look. Prague in particular has so much to offer in the way of culture, in the way of food, in the way of architecture. It's one of the great Art Nouveau cities in Europe. It's also a spectacular city when it comes to Gothic architecture. The Prague Castle obviously stems from that era. We also have a great friend in Prague, William Lobkowitz. Prince William Lobkowitz has opened his palace in a way that is quite unique to Viking. And part of the extension program is that you have an opportunity to see what Karina and William Lobkowitz together have created, a unique experience for Viking visitors only. Another example of what we do with privileged access. Okay, so that was an introduction And now I'm here to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Joost. Yes, lots of questions have come in this evening. Our first question is from Farhad, who is in the United States. And their question is there any option to visit any of the famous Vienna coffee houses?
Yes, it's actually not an option. It's mandatory that you visit coffee houses. Now, you can go to Café Landmann, you can go to Café Central. There's lots of them that you should and could try out. And the best ones are the ones that look a little old-timey, with these high ceilings where people used to smoke, and the smoke would go up to these ceilings, and people would read newspapers all day long. The best ones still have these newspapers. And so this is where the authors used to go that had no money to talk about philosophy and world affairs and read the newspapers, and they would sit on one cup of coffee. And you can still do the same thing. It's great fun.
Thank you, Joost. And our next question comes from Walter, who is in Fort Lauderdale in the US. Quite a simple question for us. How long is the Danube?
1,775 miles, give or take a few hundred yards.
Well, you can't ask for more accurate than that. And our next question comes from Lois, who is also in the US. She says, we will be cruising on the Danube in June with a pre-extension in Munich and a post-extension in Prague. What would you recommend seeing in both Munich and Prague?
In Munich, depending on what it is that you really enjoy, there are a few places that I think are super cool. First of all is the covered market. That's just great fun. You can spend half a day there just sampling local artisanal cheeses. They have great coffee there, and it's just a fun place to walk around. Then das Deutsche Museum and that's quite a mouthful, but it's a museum of that kind of depicts or that shows things that have to do with technological progress. It's kind of like the I'm trying to think of the name of this museum in Chicago that is just south of downtown Chicago. Can't think of the name right now. It's not the Field Museum. It's a museum that also deals, the Museum of Science and Industry. That's it. So it's just like the Museum of Science and Industry in Chicago. And then you should go to the Alte Pinakothek. That's also a mouthful, the Alte Pinakothek. And that is the best, that's the best collection of art from basically from the Renaissance all the way to early 20th century in Bavaria. So that's from Munich. And then in Prague, Prague is just a wonderful city to walk around in. In Prague, I would just be hesitant to focus on any particular thing. You have to go to the castle and spend time in just all these little courtyards and the churches and the big cathedral, and visit the Lobkowitz Palace and see Franz Kafka's house. But mostly in Prague, just go for long walks through the town. That's the best thing in my mind in Prague.
Thank you, Joost. And our next question comes from Eva, who is in the US. She asks, what is the air temperature like along the Danube during April and May? What would you recommend taking in terms of clothing?
Rain jacket, layered clothing. It could rain a little bit in April or May, and that's never a terrible thing, because the weather varies. It's not like it's going to rain for days on end. But bring a rain jacket, a windbreaker, and then under that just some layers. You need one sweater, and for the rest you can wear blouses or t-shirts, whatever you want.
Thank you, Joost. And our next question is from Iris, who is in Rockville in the US. Her question, quite a simple one. Which hotels do we use in Prague when booking a pre-cruise extension?
We use a number of hotels. One of the hotels we've used over the years quite a bit is the Hilton Prague. We also have used the intercontinental, but you would always have to check your particular dates and just ask. Generally, what we try to do in Prague is use hotels that are conveniently located, not just for pedestrian traffic, but also for coach traffic, because we take you there by coach, and we also we value a little bit the overall accessibility. The groups that we bring to Prague are quite often, because it's a very popular extension, they're not small. We bring people there with guides, and we need to set up hospitality desks to help our guests make the most of their time, and so on and so forth. And that kind of excludes small little boutique hotels. So they're always decent sized hotels. Usually we go for major brand names, and that's also just because we do this quite a ways in advance, and that just gives you a much better quality control if you go with larger brands. If you go with a boutique hotel and the hotel changes ownership, you may be back to square one.
Thank you, Joost. And our next question comes from Amy, who is in Silla City in the US. And she asks, what is your personal opinion in terms of best time of the year to go on this cruise?
I always like to travel in spring. It's just, it's just spring. It's a happy time. But I would say it's the only time that I would avoid if you and that this again, you asked for my personal opinion. I'm not a big fan of warm weather. Cold weather in where I come from in Northern Europe, you can dress for cold weather. You can't really dress or undress for warm weather. So I would likely personally avoid the second half of July, early August. But other than that, any time of year is a good time of year. I just personally happen to like spring.
Thank you, Joost. And we do have a lot of questions coming in about what clothing to pack and at which times of the year. What's your best advice for doing a river cruise in Europe? What should every passenger pack, no matter what time of year to go?
Ooh, the packing list. So I think what's always important, depending on where you are in the US, if you're in the American West, you live through periods of rain and then periods of drought, periods of cold and periods of heat. Most of Europe, and this goes for the entire Danube, is in a temperate climate. And that means it can rain any day of the year. There is no such thing as a dry time or a very wet time. So you always will need a mix of clothing. The temperatures aren't all that extreme. I would put on something like what I'm wearing right now if I were in Budapest or Vienna in November or in December. I would always bring a raincoat, no matter where you go, and don't be discouraged. It's part of life. I know people that live in Southern California that will say, well, if it rains, you have to stay home because you're going to get wet. No one in Europe thinks that way. It's just part of life that you have a raincoat. You come prepared, and the same thing is true for lower temperatures. Bring a coat. You don't need anything very massive, not a big overcoat. You always want to go with layers, because the weather is changeable. And you bring t-shirts, some blouses, some shirts if you're a man. You bring some comfortable pants. You bring a sweater, and you bring a windbreaker / rain jacket, and you can't go wrong. You will always be able to wear something. And don't overpack.
Yeah, no, never overpack, especially for a cruise. And our next question comes from Gerald, who is in Florida in the US. His question is there any opportunity to try the wines of the Wachau Valley on this cruise?
Again, that's not an opportunity. It's mandatory that you try a Grüner Veltliner or any of the other wines that are produced along the Wachau. It's part and parcel of the experience. It absolutely is.
Thank you, Joost. Yeah. And our next question comes from Kathleen, who is in Corvallis in the United States. She asks, why doesn't Viking maintain a wait list for sold-out shore excursions? We will be on most of this itinerary, but on the Grand European Tour from Budapest to Amsterdam in October 2022. We added the Prague extension, but haven't been able to book the Lokovic tour because it was sold out before we even knew we could book it. It was a major reason for taking the Prague extension. Is there any chance of any additional times or tour dates being added?
Yes. The short answer is yes. The somewhat longer answer is on river cruises in particular, what you will find there are essentially there are very few tours, and you will know this. I'll give you an example. If you're going from Amsterdam to Budapest, as you described, we may have time to bring you up to the roof of Cologne Cathedral. There is one elevator. We can have that elevator once a day, and that elevator has 18 people. And because one person is always the guide, that elevator cannot carry more people, so we never have more than 17 tickets for that particular excursion. After 17, it's sold out and we can't get more space ever. The same thing is true for maybe a handful of excursions. As for most of the excursions on the rivers, we generally are able to get more space when we're sold out. There's often a little bit of a lag between getting sold out and us getting extra space, and that's just in the nature of the beast. So I would, in particular with the Lobkowitz Palace, I would venture a guess that you will be able to get on that excursion. And if not before you depart, then you just ask on the ship. You have some time, you're traveling from Amsterdam to Budapest. I would eat my hat if someone on the ship cannot help you get into the Lobkowitz Palace in Prague.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. Once you're on board, have a chat to the guys. Yep. They'll definitely be able to help.
Yeah. If it doesn't work beforehand, do that. Yeah.
And then our next question is from Harris, who is also in the United States. He asks, is it better to be on the port side of the ship or the starboard side of the ship when traveling from Budapest to Regensburg?
That's hard to say because it depends on what side of the river a particular port is. Ships generally turn their bow upstream when they dock. And that basically means you're going to be on either the wrong or the right side, depending on which side of the river the dock is on. That sounds like a very technical explanation. The bottom line is you will have some ports where you may be looking at the port itself or the quay or the dock, and there will be some ports where you're looking out over the water. The thing is, the time in port, we want you to spend that time actually in port, not so much in your stateroom. And the best time to enjoy your stateroom is while the ship is cruising. So that would be my complete answer.
And our next question comes from Victor, who is also in the US. He asks, is there the opportunity to visit Salzburg on this cruise?
Yes, from Passau. Yes.
There we go. Nice, simple answer for that one.
Yep.
And our next question comes from Jane, who is also in the US. And she asks, if you had to choose between one of the extensions, which one would you choose?
That's a difficult question. So on the Regensburg end, I have the option of doing both Nuremberg and Passau, or Nuremberg and Prague. I would do the combo because I like Nuremberg. I would not want to pick. And on the other end, you end up in Budapest. I would do Budapest. Did I miss anything, Scott?
I don't believe so, off the top of my head. Budapest, Nuremberg, Prague. I think that's it off the top of my head.
That's it, yes.
I'll have a quick look after the next question.
Okay.
I'll double check it quickly.
Yeah.
But our next question comes from Ed, who is in Naples in the US. And he asks, what's the average number of passengers on board the ships?
Well, the ships hold about 190 guests, and that tends to be, we usually, these cruises are very popular. They do tend to sell out. So you'll end up with anywhere, I would say, roughly between 180 and 190 guests.
There we are. And regarding the extensions, we have 4 available for this cruise.
Mm-hmm.
You can have 2 nights in Budapest, 3 nights in Prague, 2 nights in Nuremberg, or you can combine Nuremberg and Prague together and have a total of 4 nights, 2 in each.
Yeah. So on the Regensburg side, I would say have Prague and Nuremberg, and then the Budapest side do Budapest. Yeah.
And then the next question comes from Karen, who is in Durham in the US. And she asks, at what time do passengers typically board the ships on this cruise?
It depends a little bit on where you arrive, on where you start. So in Budapest, it's virtually impossible to get direct flights from the US to Budapest. And that just has to do with the distance and the fact that Budapest doesn't have a lot of international, transatlantic connections. So that basically means that usually you will get to your destination a little after noon, and then you go straight to the ship. So you'll be arriving roughly between, I would say, noon and 2-3 o'clock in the afternoon. And in Munich, it's a little earlier. Munich does have direct connections, so it's possible that you arrive in the morning. And then to Regensburg, it's another about an hour and a half to get there. So in Regensburg, guests start arriving towards the end of the morning.
Well, there we are. And our next question comes from Larry, who is in the US. He asks, why was Nuremberg dropped from the Romantic Danube cruise, and will it return?
It was dropped because we felt that we needed a little bit more time in Vienna. And so we figured that if we can then offer Nuremberg as an extension, we're still able to offer Nuremberg. The other advantage that this itinerary has is that there is a relatively shallow spot in the river between Regensburg and Nuremberg. And we cut that out altogether on this itinerary, doing it the way we are doing it. So we have less issues with low water or high water, for that matter, because right at that shallow spot there also happens to be a low bridge. So it's a little bit of a pinch point.
And our next question comes from Francis, who is in the United States. A nice and simple question for us. Are excursions included on this cruise?
Yes. So the way it works on river cruising is that we will always, we will always show you the destination in the included excursion. If you want to venture a little bit beyond if you will, the iconic and the expected excursions, you can book optional excursions. But I would say that you can have a splendid time with booking some of these optional excursions. You will also have a splendid time without booking any of them. It's more a matter of what you want in the way of making individual choices. We find that that's a much better way to approach it than for us to try to sell you something, because that's just not what we're about. You'll know ahead of time what it is that we have on offer, and you'll know exactly what it will cost. And it simply allows you to customize your own experience a little bit. And that's how we like it.
Thank you, Joost. And our next question comes from Barbara, who is in Philadelphia in the United States. Her question is, are there any daily programs or activities on board the ship? If so, when would we learn this schedule?
Yes, there are daily programs there. We have lectures, we have local entertainment, we have cooking demonstrations. Those things usually come together I would say a few months before each cruise. So you will find these things as you board. And they're usually spaced in such a way that you can participate around the shore excursions. Look, the ship is relatively small. We make the most out of the space that we have. The focus is obviously going to be on the destination itself. A river ship is not like an ocean ship where you could spend a few days just being on the ship and entertaining yourself that way and learning that way. We have a library, we have a wonderful lounge, but we're more limited in what we can offer than on a larger ocean vessel. And so the focus is on what happens outside. What happens on board supports what we do outside. So the lectures support, give a framework of what you're going to be seeing when you're ashore. You know, you'll get a little bit of a backgrounder so that you understand better what you find yourself in when you walk off the gangplank. We bring on local entertainment, again, that is to kind of give you a slice of the culture of that city that you're in or that country that you're in. So it is all very much goes hand in hand with the Shorex experience.
Thank you, Joost. And we've got a few more questions coming in about clothes again, but it is touching a slightly different area. So the first half of this question is from Len, who's in Pinehurst in the United States. They ask, should you pack some semi-formal wear, such as a cocktail dress or any dinner jackets? And then Kathy from Harrisburg in the United States does kind of add on to that question with, what is the dress code for going to the Mozart concert?
The experience tells us that the Mozart concert in Vienna is a time when people like to dress up a little bit, and everyone can do this as they please. We advise people that at a minimum, maybe a jacket for men and a dress for women is a great thing, but everyone is free on a river cruise to dress as they see fit. In the evening, certainly, most men will want to wear, you know, and even that even goes for dinner on board. Most men will wear a collar, you know, whether it's a polo shirt or a shirt, a dress shirt. Many men wear jackets, and you know, it's largely left up to the individual.
Thank you, Joost. And our next question comes from Christelle, who is in Minden in the United States. She says, when one books a pre-cruise package, are passengers completely left on their own to do what they want to do? Or does Viking get involved and help them organise their extra time? Yes,
the latter. We get involved and we help you organize your time. So you have a lot of freedom on the extensions, generally, especially the shorter extensions. Those are 2 nights in a hotel where we make sure that you have breakfast, where we make sure that you're brought in from the airport and then from the hotel to the ship. But we have a desk, and that is, in my mind, that is very much key to the entire experience. Yes, you can do whatever you want. Yes, you are doing a lot of these things on your own, but you have the local expert right there, and you can take some time, and I think you should not just wander by and pick up some leaflets, but take some time to explain what it is that you're looking for, and someone can help you make the most out of your time. You know, we can put together programs, and we certainly do this on rivers, and as I just explained with the optional excursions, we already allow you to customize a little bit. There it's all still very much organized, but on the extensions, while you have this freedom, I always encourage people to make use of that Viking person, because just striking out on your own, that sounds like a great plan. You need to have a little bit of a sense of what it is that you want to do.
Absolutely. And our next question comes from Kim, who is in Columbus in the United States. She asks, how do we get from the Prague extension to the ship?
By coach. And it depends a little bit on where you book the Prague extension. If you book it towards the, if you book it from Budapest, it's a somewhat longer ride that takes you through Slovakia and through what used to be Moravia and then into Bohemia to get to Prague. And if you do Prague on the other end, you travel clear across from Prague directly west towards Germany, towards Nuremberg.
Thank you, Joost. And our next question comes from Deborah, who is in El Dorado Hills in the US. She says, we have scheduled our extra excursions. However, if we do decide to add an extra excursion, can we do this while on board?
Yes. Yes, of course.
Nice and simple, that one. And our next question comes from Paul, who is in the UK, and also touching on excursions again. He says, included trips are bookable well in advance, but how many days before departure do the optional trips come available?
They're usually available as soon as we have made our agreements with our with the venues and with the vendors. So we do it as quickly as we possibly can to give you plenty of time to plan. That's the whole idea.
Absolutely. Thank you, Joost. And our next question comes from Robert, who is in New Orleans in the US. He says, can I bring my drone along for aerial shots?
You may not. Sorry. You would need to go through the trouble of finding out the legalities of this in each of the German states, in Austria, and in Hungary. And chances that you will be able to line all of this up are extremely slim. So we're not doing it on board. And it's not just the local municipalities. It's all on top of that. You would need to get permission from each of the various different authorities that regulate riverine traffic. It's virtually impossible to do. The only time we ever have drones fly over our ships is if we have commercial operators that do this for like marketing purposes, and it's something that takes weeks and months to put together. So it's simply not. It's not generally done.
Thank you, Joost. And our next question comes from Candy, who is in Indianapolis in the US. And their question is, at what time does a person need to return to the ship in the evening? Will we be able to participate in any nighttime activities in the cities that we visit?
Yes, it always depends a little bit on where you are and when you depart. You usually have to be on board no later than half an hour before the ship is to depart. But we do try as much as we can in the bigger cities in particular to give you an overnight so that you can walk off the ship and enjoy local life in the evenings as well. Yeah.
Thank you, Joost. And our next question comes from Joanne, and she is in the United States. And her question is, what currency should we bring along for the various locations from Prague to Budapest? Do all of the countries use euros?
You can. I would bring an ATM card, and then if you would want to exchange money, you could. For Hungary, you use the forint, and in the Czech Republic, officially it's still the koruna, but more and more people will allow you to pay with a card, especially after COVID. People like getting paid with cards, and here and there, especially in areas as frequented by tourists, you will also be able to pay in euros. So I would not invest too much money in getting forints or Czech crowns.
Thank you, Joost. And our next question comes from Graham, who is in New Dundee in Canada. And his question is, leaving Regensburg, is it easily accessible to fly home from Berlin?
No. It's quite a trek to get to Berlin. And Regensburg, while it's a big city on the river, it is within the rail network. It's not that large, and that basically means you do have to take that into account when you you can do it. It's just you'll have to change trains a number of times. Or if you were to fly, which I wouldn't recommend, you would have to go to Munich and then fly to Berlin. But if you want to tack on some time in Berlin, make it worth your while, spend 3 days at least in Berlin, and yeah, then you can take the train. It's a bit of a trek, but it's doable.
And our next question comes from Joanne, and she says, we are travelling with you on the Danube during the first week of December. We are excited about visiting the Christmas markets. Will there be markets in each port of call along the way?
Yes, in some of the smaller villages, these tend to be very small, but in all the bigger ports, you will have markets galore. Yes, you will have that complete experience. I think, for instance, in Melk, it's relatively modest, and in these little villages in the Wachau, it's not a whole lot. It's charming, but it's not like you have a few dozen stalls. It's more like you have 15, 16 stalls. But especially in cities like Regensburg is perfect. Passau is really good. Vienna is awesome. And Budapest is great. Yeah.
Thank you, Joost. And our next question comes from Herb. And they ask, how does this vary from the cruise that departs from Passau to Budapest?
It basically, you shift the emphasis a little bit. If you go from Passau to Budapest, you skip Regensburg altogether, and the extensions are a little different, and then the relative time spent in each port is a little bit different. And from Passau to Budapest, you still stop in Bratislava. You can do this also on the Romantic Danube on an excursion, but that's a little bit more cumbersome. It's a matter of, I don't know. It's really a matter of taste. I think I would say that because between Passau and Budapest, it's just you cover less ground. It's a little slower. Anyone that likes to kind of take it easy, I would probably say Passau to Budapest. And everyone that's ready to cover a little bit more territory, I would advise Regensburg to Budapest.
Thank you, Joost. And our next question comes from Elaine. She's in Santos in Brazil. And her question is, when does the Mozart Festival take place in Vienna?
I don't know. That is something that you would. So there are two things about this. This is something that you can find out through our call center. But a word of caution: you spend a limited amount of time in Vienna, and so chances of you being able to book tickets that coincide with the exact dates when you're in Vienna for your cruise are somewhat reduced. If this is what you would really like to do, what I would do is book some nights in Vienna before you join the cruise. And the way to do that would be really easy. You can take a train from Vienna to Budapest to start in Budapest on your cruise, on your river journey, and then you can kind of mold your stay in Vienna around the Mozart Festival. That's how I would do it. It just works a little bit better that way.
Thank you, Joost. And our next question comes from Sharon, who is in Boston in the United States. She asks, what is your suggestion regarding learning the languages of the host countries? Are there any specific things we should learn to say?
Hello and thank you. I wouldn't overdo it. You cannot learn a language it's hard to learn a language, period. It's certainly not something that you can do within a year. Hungarians will get a great kick out of if you can say köszönöm, which means thank you. And in Germany, people will appreciate it if you say goodbye in German, or if you say hello in German. Those are things that you can certainly do. I would hesitate to invest an awful lot of time in it. I would much rather learn a little bit more about the culture, so that, for instance, in a place where there's food, you can get some local food. Or this is also one of my favorites. Look a little bit into our reading list, for instance. If you have some time to invest in getting to know the place, look at our reading list. Look at our filmography. Study up a little bit on the country that way. It gives you a really nice flavor of local culture that way.
Absolutely agree. Thank you, Joost. And our next question comes from Janice, who is in the US. Quite a simple question for us here, Joost. Is the Christmas on the Danube cruise similar to this one?
Yes, it is. No, that's a facetious answer. It is. It just puts a little bit more emphasis on spending quality time in the markets themselves. But that's the biggest difference. The cruise is very similar. There's a shift in emphasis.
Thank you, Joost. And our next question comes from David, who is in Phoenix in the US. The question is, if you take an e-bike tour, for example, and it rains, does the tour still go anyway? Similar question for any tour. Does it always go rain or shine?
Unless it's cats and dogs, it's rain or shine. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, I think our weather over here is a little bit different compared to in Phoenix in the US. A lot less. A few more rainy days over here.
Yeah.
And our next question comes from Gayla, who is in the United States. She asks, how many public baths are there in Budapest? And is there a specific one that you would recommend going to, Joost?
If you want it a little bit opulent and with a bit of a modern, it's kind of, the Széchenyi baths are a favorite because they have this beautiful turn of the century architecture, but it is relatively modern on the inside. And if you want to try something that is a little bit more rustic from an experiential point of view, but has this beautiful Art Nouveau interior, then I would go to the Gellert baths.
Thank you, Joost. And our next question comes from Audrey, who is in West Hampton Beach in the US. And she asks, is there any time to visit any World War II concentration camps during this cruise?
It's not easy. If you were to stay in Munich for a few, although we don't offer Munich on this particular one, Mauthausen is not that far from. I would need to look that up real quick. Scott, can you look that up? We might be going to Mauthausen on this one. I don't have that off the top of my head, and that's along the Danube in Austria. But that would be the closest place, and that would probably be the only place that would work.
I will have a look for it whilst you're answering the next question.
Yeah.
And our next question comes from Lenore, who is in the United States. Sort of two parts of this question. First of all, how do we get to the Benedictine monastery? And if someone has a walker, are they going to manage this shore excursion?
You get to the monastery by coach. We just drive you up the hill. And you will be somewhat limited, but not so limited that it would not be worth going. You would not be able to actually, hold on. No, there is an elevator so that you can see the grand staircase on both from down below and from top. It's there. The infrastructure is there, and there are people there to help you.
Perfect, thank you. Yes, I'm still looking up the answer for that question, so let's have a look for another one. Here we are. So, Tony from Seven Oaks in the UK, he asks, is it best to eat on board or sample the local restaurants?
Both. On board, we don't serve bland cruise food. Your voyage on the ship is part of where you are. So we have menus that are a reflection of what you would find along the shore. We have wines that are a reflection of what you see as you float through the landscape. And the great fun of every once in a while, skipping lunch, for instance, or skipping dinner for a snack in a local pub is not so much the food itself, it's the experience of rubbing elbows with the locals. Do both.
I agree, definitely do both. And our next question comes from Carolyn, who is in the United Kingdom, and she asks, would we be able to see the Spanish stallions when we go to Vienna on this cruise?
There are two ways to see the Lipizzaner horses. One is during training sessions, and that gives you a little bit of a look behind the scenes. And then they have their performances. The training sessions we can do, the performances are a little bit trickier. They tend to take place in the morning, and you would basically need to make a choice, and that's up to you. This usually happens while we would normally offer you a city tour, so that you can get your bearings in Vienna and that you have the basics down. Yes. And so you could look up, and this can easily go online. We can also help you on board. If this is something that you absolutely must do, I would book tickets online before you go. If it's just something that you think is nice to have, then you can ask assistance on board. But you will likely have to forego the city tour. And that's not a big deal. In Vienna, it's really easy to get around from the ship somewhat independently. So I would, if this is what you really want to do, go for it. By all means, do it.
Thank you, Joost. And our next question comes from Laurie, who is in Fairpoint in the US. And she says, we'll be ending our trip with an extension in Budapest at Easter. Will we still be able to see and do all the things, considering it is predominantly a Catholic country and therefore there may be certain celebrations going on?
Yeah, it's not going to be. Easter is not that huge in Hungary. I don't believe that you will have any real difficulties. No.
Thank you, Joost. And just going back to visiting Madhausen concentration camp, it definitely is close enough for the guys on board the ship to potentially organise something from Passau or Vienna, or if that is something that you really do want to visit, I would recommend booking onto the Danube Waltz cruise.
Because the Danube Waltz has it, yes, okay.
Yeah. Danube Waltz, you can, the port of call of Linz is very, very close to Madhausen. Yes. And you will definitely be able to see that.
Yes.
Funny enough, we are actually doing a presentation on the Danube Waltz next week. So if you're interested in learning about that,
yes,
tune in next week, definitely.
And Scott, I would say do it that way because it is a trek from both Passau and from Vienna. It's a bit of a trek.
It definitely is. It's not unfeasible, but it's definitely going to take up a whole day, I think. If you book onto the Romantic Danube. Our next question is regarding clothing again. And Kathy from Columbus asks, how should a person dress to visit the Abbey?
I would say that it is up to the individual. There's no rules of it. You know, in Salzburg, in some of the more conservative churches, you cannot wear short skirts and you have to cover your shoulders. That's not really an issue at the Abbey. But generally, you know, very short skirts and tank tops are not a good idea.
I agree. And our next question comes from Thomas, who is in, not too sure if I'm going to pronounce this correctly, Omaha in the United States.
Yes.
And his question is, we are scheduled to cruise next month, but his itinerary only calls for 1 day in Vienna and 1 day in Linz, which is not mentioned in your presentation. I think we know why. But his question is, what should we see in Linz?
The city, so there are two things that you can do in Linz. We have excursions that take you a little further afield to either Salzburg or Český Krumlov. If your thing is not spending an awful lot of time traveling beyond where you are, Linz itself is a very charming mid-sized city in Austria, where you can just visit the center of the city. It has some Baroque churches. It has a very nice main square. It has some really interesting old buildings. It has a building where Mozart lived for a while. So you have a pick. You have a few things that you can do in Linz.
Absolutely. And Thomas, the reason why your itinerary is slightly different to this one is you're booked on a cruise called the Danube Waltz, which is very similar to this cruise, the Romantic Danube, but does differ slightly.
Yeah.
Lovely. And just having a quick look to see what other questions we've got. Here we are. So Florence from the United States asks, if you do a pre or post tour extension, is pick up or drop off at the airport included?
Yes.
A nice simple answer.
Yeah.
Here we are. So Jerry from the United States asks, how common are English-speaking people in the destinations?
So the question really is, you know, will I have difficulties making myself understood? At least that's how I interpret it. I would say that you, except when you're in smaller villages, you will not have any problems having people speak English. Although they have their own accents. I don't believe that you will run into real language difficulties unless you roam somewhat further afield. But the great thing is, you know, the Danube, that entire region has really kind of been discovered when these river voyages started to take off. And so everyone kind of knows when you go along the Danube, especially roughly between Nuremberg and Budapest, everyone knows, oh, those are the people that come from the ships. And that creates a fairly welcoming atmosphere.
Thank you, Joost. And we've got a few questions that are all sort of revolving around the same thing, which I'm sure you can answer. Main question is, will this video be available to watch online after, or can I only watch this presentation live?
Nope, you can watch it after. But you're watching it now. But you can re-watch it, yes.
Yeah, no, you absolutely can re-watch it anytime. Our next question comes from Lee, who is in the United States. And the question is, for the Romantic Danube from Regensburg to Budapest, does a local chef take you into the market in Vienna? Also, is this available on all Viking cruises?
Yeah, virtually in all of them. Yes, it's great fun. The Naschmarkt in Vienna, one of the best, one of my favorite places, certainly.
I agree.
I have really good local cheese there. Not many people know this, and you got me going now. You know, Austria has, of course, these alpine regions, and we all know Swiss cheese. The Swiss are famous for their cheeses, but they have some phenomenal cheeses also in Austria, and you can get those at the Naschmarkt without any problem. So try some Austrian cheeses there, mountain cheeses, phenomenal.
Thank you, Joost. And our next question comes from Charles, and the question is, what is the food like on board the ship? Will it be predominantly German throughout this cruise?
No, it's going to be a little bit. There's going to be German touches, Austrian touches, Hungarian touches, and you will always have choices that are a little closer to home, if you will, a little bit more towards the Anglo-Saxon palate, if you will. And you have vegetarian choices. So no, it's not, you will not need to leave the ship 5 pounds heavier than you were. And it's not sauerkraut and sausage every night. Absolutely not. There's a really good variety of food.
Thank you, Joost. And our next question comes from Jeff, who is in the United States. Quite a simple question for us. Where do you fly into and out of from the United States?
So you will fly in for Regensburg, you will fly into Munich. And Budapest, you fly into Budapest.
Absolutely. And I think a part of that question was as well, where can we catch the flights from America itself there, Joost?
Oh, from the US? Well, that anywhere. You will. I mean, depending on where you live, obviously, you will probably be routed through a hub. Depending on where you are, that would be a place like LA, San Francisco, Chicago, Dallas-Fort Worth, Hartsfield in Atlanta, Miami, or JFK, or Boston for that matter. And that will usually get you to, it can get you to Munich directly, and to get to Budapest, you generally will end up changing planes either in Paris or in Frankfurt.
Thank you, Joost. And our next question comes from Kathy, who is in San Diego in the US. She says, I have to eat gluten-free food. Now, she's aware that this wouldn't be a problem on board the ship, but would there be any guidance by the staff or in places in the various cities which we visit?
That's a little bit trickier, although I don't believe that, except perhaps in small towns, you will not really have a problem. Europe, when it comes to that, has also changed, has gone with the times. I don't think you will find this to be problematic. And the good thing is that, particularly in German, now in Hungary, because of the language, anything that's written on a menu has to be translated, because Hungarian is a very difficult language. But guess what the word in German for gluten is? Gluten. And it's almost spelt the same. And you have as many people that cannot eat gluten in Germany as you have in the US. So you'll be absolutely fine, even if you decide to eat on shore.
Thank you, Joost. And our next question comes from Cindy. She's in the US. She asks, are the baths in Budapest available all year long?
Yes. Yes. Now, a lot of these baths have outdoor areas that will get a little nippy in winter, but no, absolutely. They're open year round.
Thank you, Joost. And we're coming up to, this is going to be the last question. It's all we have time for this evening, I'm afraid. But the last question for you is from Charles, who is in Philadelphia. And his question is, where would we find the suggested reading lists that you mentioned earlier?
there is a tab when you go onto the cruise tab. There is a section called resources. There's a tab called resources, and that's where you will find it. Reading lists and filmographies.
Thank you, Joost. And that is all of the time we have for any questions this evening.
Okay. Thank you, everyone, for watching, and we'll see you next week.